I keep rewinding the helmet cam to the moment I should have noticed. The visor had iced on the edges because the starside faceplate was bleeding heat faster than the suit could push it. Frost spiders crawled across the curved glass, and for a breath or two there was an alphabet in the ice, strokes that looked like letters my brain almost knew. I blinked, wiped it with the back of the glove, and told myself it was nothing but temperature gradients. That lie feels like the first murder. I was EVA lead that day, the one with the most hours outside. We dipped under the atmosphere of Ella 17b, just enough to graze its exo-snow, a sheath of charged ice grains lofted by the planet's sapphire storms. The brief was simple: scoop, bag, bake. Bring back the high-latitude particles Strom wanted for his magnetosphere model, log any fluorescence, and make sure nothing made it past the airlock without screaming under a thermal camera. We control the contamination, I said on the debrief. We control the cold. We brought it back anyway. We brought it home in the seams of our suits. I remember touch points, Anika's laugh crackling over UHF as she teased my tether work. Osei humming a hymn as he kicked off the array and swung himself to the lock. The planet under us, blue-black, swirling with bands that flashed like distant welding arcs when lightning went off below the clouds. The way the samples, those innocent light traps we'd left open for 30 seconds, came back glittering like a pocket full of stars. Deccan was textbook. We stowed the canisters, scanned, scrubbed, baked. The external suit rinses chittered hot air through ducts loud as a train in my bones, and the smell, burnt plastic and lemon solvent, filled the lock. Inside, I stood shivering while the inner jets boiled condensation off my undersuit. Strom gave a thumbs up through the viewport. Smooth as a St. Petersburg winter, he said. I'm the only one who remembers he used to say things like that. The crack was nothing. Not even a hairline, more like a hair's shadow. On playback I can see it where the connector ring mates to my left thigh. A fracture in the plating of the thermal layer. The rinse fog doesn't wash through, it eddies there, clings, then disappears as if sucked into the seam. The thermal imager paints a drop in blue and then, in one frame, green like something metabolized heat. It's there and I didn't see it, and I signed the clearance. Later, when I kicked off my boots in the locker, I heard something on the suit radio that wasn't my crew. A high whisper under the carrier, like someone blowing across a bottle, modulated into syllables. The syllables repeated in time with the circulation pumps. HAA, MMM, HAA, MMM. It made the hairs along my wrists rise. I pulled the battery. It kept going for 3 breaths. I told myself it was feedback. I told myself it was my own pulse. In the galley, the laughter had a forced edge. These things happen after high-risk EVAs. We sit too straight. We pretend the soup tastes like anything but salt and pack it. The planet wheeled across the viewport, lightning making ghost veins in the clouds. You took your time out there, Anika said. You see a postcard? I smiled. I didn't tell her the frost had written back. I didn't tell anyone. I slept badly. In the middle of the night cycle I woke to the taste of blood and ozone and a sound like someone breathing through a flute. It was coming from the vent. When I put my ear to the grill, the cold on the metal licked at my skin. The breath carried syllables. My name, almost, and the other names too, failing, slipping, becoming numbers. 5th, 3rd, 1st. Then the vent clicked hot and the voice went silent, and I lay there with my hand on the wall and a stupid thought in my head. The ship is exhaling. It's tired. We brought it something heavy to carry. By morning, the frost on my helmet cam had melted into an undifferentiated film. If you pause at the right frames, though, you can still see the strokes like a child writing with a finger on a cold window. It looks like HEL, and then it collapses into geometry. I want to tell you it was a plea. I want to tell you the thing we brought back tried to be polite. I can't tell if that makes this better or worse. Protocol requires we run memory checks after any EVA beyond 7 hours, because hypoxia can be a slow thief. We take turns telling each other the history of the ship's name, the mission motto, the birthdays of our crewmates. It's theater, mostly a way to look into each other's eyes and measure what shakes. This time it wasn't theater. Osei lost mine. His face went blank like a monitor losing signal. You're, he said, and his hands made a circle in the air, trying to attach me to something invisible. You're the pilot, he finished lamely. I laughed it off. Engineer, I corrected, tapping the patch on my sleeve. He flushed and smiled and said he was just tired. He hummed at him again later, but it was out of tune, and halfway through he shifted to a rhythm I'd never heard. I keep dreaming in numbers, he said over coffee, eyes red. Not equations. More like inventory. He tapped his chest. 883. And then that makes sense. Barcode brain, Anika said. She grinned, but the skin around her mouth was white. I dreamed I was a ladder. Tell me about the ladder, Strum said, curious. There's a way scientists ask about dreams that makes you feel like a petri dish. It wasn't a metaphor, she said. I was bolted to a wall. People climbed me. The bones in my hands were rungs. When I woke up, my knuckles hurt like I'd been gripping for hours. She flexed her fingers and winced. It's stupid. We were all stupid that morning. We ran the Deccan logs again and again because Strum likes checking the cage after the tiger's already out. All green until I noticed a UI flicker on the inner lock authorization. The signature read, L. Garen. That's me. Only the L wasn't the L I use. The stroke order was wrong, a child's backward loop. You write like you're from the mirror universe, Anika said, leaning over my shoulder. When did you sign this? I didn't, I said. The timestamp was during EVA. The system shouldn't accept an internal authorization when the suit telemetry flags me as exterior. You spoofed it, Strum said, half joking, but he didn't meet my eyes. We argued until the grow lights clicked on for the algae racks, and then we all fell silent. Condensation had filmed the interior of the clear polymer, and in the green there were lines where the droplets refused to settle, pathways of dryness tracing shapes. We watched as the film moved of its own accord, the way you can watch oil creep across water if you impatiently try to blow it level. The lines bent into right angles, into repeating patterns. It looked like a city's aerial map and also like the skeleton of a hand. When the heat kicked a notch higher, the lines broke and ran. Nobody said it. We all thought it. Writing. We pulled the racks offline and stared at each other until I said what a leader says. We're tired. We're seeing patterns. We'll scrub the vents, we'll wipe the walls, we'll drink water and sleep. I assigned chores as if assigning could fix us. I took the suits. Inside the locker, the smell of lemon solvent had thinned to something metallic. My left thigh ring showed no obvious damage. If I fingered the seam just right, a coolness bled into my skin as if the suit remembered winter. By the second sleep cycle, Osei had started calling Strum second, like he was a component in a sequence, and he did it with graffitied confidence that said the word had always been right. Second, pass me the spanner, he said, and when Strum bristled, Osei frowned. That's your name, he said carefully. Second. You maintain. He blinked, shook his head, and muscle memory snapped back. Strum. Sorry. He laughed. It was a dry laugh with too many teeth in it. I wrote our names on white tape and stuck them over the bunks like labels. Anika rolled hers up and put it in her pocket like a lucky charm. You're my captain, she told me when I caught her eyes drifting to the tape instead of to my face. Even if you're not. It's safer to pretend. That night the vents sang again. Not sung like music, sung like an antenna when wind brooms over it. The tone was harmonic with the ship's pumps and fans. I lay listening, awake and not alone. My name came, then shifted, then smoothed into first. When I pressed my palm to the wall, the cold inside met the heat of me and the condensate drew a shape under my hand. It looked like my own palm print, only the fingers were longer. In morning Strum could not remember what coffee was called. He held the cup, sniffed it and said, "The bitter," with relief. We laughed. We laughed because we knew if we didn't, the ship would hear us cracking. The sound the ship makes when power reroutes around a fault is a low moan, like a cello across a single frayed string. It vibrated my molars when the secondary bus tripped and everything dipped, a blinking heartbeat in the panels and a flick in the grow light's green. The aroma of hot electronics is sharp as citrus, a ghost of the lemon cleaner baked into components. That morning the smell came from everywhere at once, like the whole ship had been zest. We moved like a drill team because movement meant not thinking. I took the crawl space toward the aft relay, Anika dove under the algae racks to isolate their feeds, Strum barked numbers on the bus status, and Osei spun down the centrifuge before its imbalance turned lethal. In the crawl space the air was colder than it should have been. I could see my breath just for a moment, small prisms spinning between my teeth and the grate. I told myself the moan was power handling. I told myself the sheen under my glove was condensation and not some kind of residue left by the frost we'd dragged into the ship's lungs. At the relay I found the failure, a hairline crack in a ceramic insulator, carbonized into a neat little bridge. I replaced it, then ran my thumb along the old one. The carbonized line was not random. It laid itself from lug to lug with the neat right angles of a wiring diagram. The burn had logic. That thought stopped my breath. When I breathed again, the little prisms spun frantic and vanished. On my way back I heard it, soft, so soft I almost shrugged it off as the ship resettling. A whisper from the bundle of fiber trunk running along the tunnel. The fibers were coated in frost. We shouldn't have frost in a trunk. We shouldn't have frost anywhere we haven't sanctioned. The whisper beat in time with the fan, H-A, M-M-M, H-A, M-M-M. The pattern had shifted. It was more complex now, a staircase of harmonics my ear climbed without permission. If language is a solvent, this one was soaking the insulation. Anika's voice in my earpiece snapped me out. I'm cutting circulation to rack C, she said. The condensate, it's drawing the logo. She laughed too loud. We don't have a logo. Don't cut full, Strum said. We need oxygen and the algae are the ship's green lungs, yes. Yes. Her voice sharpened. Then tell it to stop writing. Back in the galley, our white tapes peeled at the corners. Osei tapped mine with a nail and said, first. His face was careful, like he was performing friendliness from a script he'd memorized earlier. He held up his hands and stared at the lines across his palms. When I close my eyes, he said, I see rails. Like tracks. And I want to lay them in the walls. It's sleep debt, Strum said. His own hands shook. We're keeping a log of perceptual anomalies, we'll correlate with environmental stressors. He sounded like a manager giving an interview after a factory explosion. I checked the Deccan logs again, and obsession now. The signature flickered, and in one clean frame the authorization line changed not just the letter shape but the language. Not my name. Not any alphabet I know. And yet my body recognized it. My pulse slowed. My shoulders softened. It said, permission granted in the tongue of the cold. Osei spilled coffee. The splash made a dark star on the table. He stared at it, then up at me. First, he said, did you ever taste the sun? His eyes were calm. I don't think we used to have tongues. I think we had fins. Or veins. He laughed breathlessly. We used to turn to face the field. We used to be primates, I snapped. My voice went too loud. It bounced off the metal and came back thin. We used to be crew. He nodded, polite. His mouth formed the word crew very carefully, as if fitting it around different teeth. That night cycle I woke with a taste of lemon and carbon on my tongue and a certainty that the ship had spent the last hour teaching itself to whistle. In the sleeping bay, someone had written in grease pencil on the wall, "We are parts." The PS had been gone over twice to make them look like Fs, then crossed out, then made P again. Anika slept face down, her fingers flexing like they grasped rungs. Osei hummed. Strum whispered numbers. 883. 512. I went to the locker and opened my suit. The inside smelled like a freezer left open in a fish market. The thigh ring seam was frosted floral, tiny fern-like patterns that grew and melted as I breathed on them. When I pressed my rope-burned thumb against them, the ferns grew toward my heat. I can't explain how wrong that looked. Plants should grow toward light. Not toward a body. Not toward me. Down in the vent, the tone rose half a step. My name rubbed itself down to first again, and the second syllable in the hum loosened into something close to home. Anika stopped answering to her name midway through the third day. It happened in small refusals. Engineer, she'd say if you called her from the rack, and it wasn't a correction, it was an insistence. Engineer, maintain vector, to the ship as if to a child. Engineer, keep the flow. We joked at first, petty defense. She's role-playing the job, Strum said. Maybe we should all. Then she stood on the table, eyes too bright, and told us we were arranged incorrectly. You can't think in a room like this, she said, and she moved us like furniture, labeling us as she pushed. Second here. Third there. First faces the air intake. Osei, you just stand by the window and lift your hands when the lightning flashes. She breathed the ship's regulated air like it was something rich and dangerous. It's wrong to breathe it thinking it's yours, she said to me in a whisper when I protested. We were pretending we owned lungs. We argued about quarantine. We did it calmly like professionals. I proposed we lock ourselves into single compartments with separate scrubbers and comms cut to prevent whatever meme or spore or contagion this was from jumping the gap. Strum argued for surgical masks and proximity locks and maintaining shared operations, because isolation kills as efficiently as disease. Osei stood between us with his eyes on the vent intake and said he could hear it sinking with his heart. I'm calm now, he said. It likes calm. Anika built diagrams. She took every whiteboard, every scrap of paper, the inside of cabinet doors, and filled them with schematics that weren't of our ship and weren't not of our ship. The lines repeated. The angles held consistent. She drew rungs along the wall and labeled them with numbers made of segments, as if the numbers themselves were ladders. She drew a figure with arms out, hands splayed wide, fingers long. The hands were not hands. They were radiators. What are you doing? I asked and kept my voice soft like to a person on a ledge. Can you tell me what you're doing? She was very patient with me. I'm making a place for the wind, she said. We are too solid. We are too wet. We remember wrists and teeth. That's loud. It's so loud. She shivered and put her palm on the wall. The condensate formed around her hand, reluctant to touch her skin. It wants us to be quieter. Who? I asked. What wants us? She tapped the wall gently. The field we brought in. That was when she turned the oxygen down. She did it smoothly, making it look routine. Conserving until we solve the leak, she said, a lie without interest in being good. Lower O2 will cut the flare-ups, she added, stroking the algae tank as if it was a cat. Once we stop being noisy, it will fit. I slapped the panel back up. The hiss of richer air hitting my lungs was a pleasure so sharp it bordered on grief. Anika watched my face. You are addicted, she observed, kind, to being warm. In the sleep cycle, I woke to find her in the locker, head inside my suit. Anika, I said, and the sound of the name made her flinch like chalk on a board. Engineer, she corrected, muffled. She was breathing the cold smell. When she pulled back, her lips were white from frost. She smiled at me with chapped skin and eyes that reflected the low light as if there was a second iris there. You carry the template, she whispered. Inside your seams. Her breath plumed. It writes in you. I told her to get out. My voice cracked toward anger. She laughed softly. It isn't yours first, she said. We just used the word skin for a while and got attached. Later, in the galley, she stopped talking entirely. She raised her hands above her head when the lightning flashed on the planet below, like a plant orienting toward sun. Sweat beaded at her temples and froze in tiny stars before melting. Osei whistled, trying to catch harmony with the vent. Strum muttered numbers. I wrote my name on my wrist with a pen, then pressed the ink to the camera and made it read it back so I'd hear my name in a voice that wasn't my own. Anika left us. Not physically. She was still in the room. She smiled at jokes we didn't tell and stroked the wall with fingers that, in her mind, had flattened into fins. When I called, Anika, and she didn't turn, I felt something twist inside me, a knot tied with gloved hands. I called engineer. She looked. That was the last moment her name reached her. With the next dawn cycle, she had braced a ladder against the algae racks. She climbed to the vent and pressed her mouth to the grill. Not kissing. Listening. Her face relaxed, the way a diver's face does in the first seconds of a perfect descent. She whispered into the cold and it whispered back the sound of a home she could not remember ever losing. I imposed it anyway. I sealed compartment doors. I locked down comms to line-of-sight lasers through viewports so the carrier couldn't ride the air. We laughed at my theatrics, but we let me do it. Strum agreed with a shrug that said he wanted the ritual, not the result. Osei murmured, first says air quiet, like a prayer. Anika, engineer, sat with her back to the vent, smiling at a tune I couldn't hear. I set scrubbers to overheat cycles to drive out any frost. I pulled filters and held them to the light. On the fibers, the dust made constellations. If you looked long enough, the patterns came into focus, grids, ladders, rails. The constellations rearranged themselves when I breathed on them. Not drifted. Rearranged. In isolation, my head got louder. Without the chorus of other lungs, my own labor sounded like a machine that wanted to be a storm. I recorded a log and deleted it, recorded again, deleted again because my voice kept slipping into someone else's cadence, a rhythm of long and short as if the words needed to be lengths, not meanings. 2 hours into quarantine, the comm laser flickered. It shouldn't. Only thermal bloom in the window could bend the beam. I went to the viewport and found a halo of frost around the rim inside. When I touched it with my wrist, it felt like trying to pet static. The frost did not melt. It thickened in fern-like licks in the direction of the beam, as if the light was food and it wanted closer. Across the hall, Osei pressed his palm to his glass and grinned like a kid. He mouthed, "IT can cross anyway." He wrote with his finger on fog, "Home." Then he wiped it away and his eyes came back to me, frightened. He shook his head, mouthed, "Sorry?" He scratched at the tape with his name as if it itched. Strum started to pray. Not to any god I recognize. He prayed to the numbers, listing them in sequences, soothing them like animals. Prime. Composite. 883. 512. I couldn't get him to stop. "Count me," he begged, teeth chattering, not from cold but from wanting. "Count me so I know what I am." Anika made a more practical sabotage. She took the emergency blankets and taped them into funnels around the vents so the air noise concentrated, purer, like the ghost of a flute turned into a cold organ. The tone sharpened. The writing in the frost got steadier. The patterns in the filters held longer before collapsing. When the alarms went off, they were embarrassed. Quarantine locks popping, one by one, not as if hacked but as if gently convinced they belonged open. I checked the logs. The authorizations marched down the list signed by me in that backward stroke, like a left-handed child tugging me into a mirror. Permission granted. The door told me in a voice that sounded like mine pitched a half-tone down. I armed the cutter. I told myself I'd cut a section of duct and bake it. I told myself fire was language and would speak louder. I opened the access and put my face into winter. The inside of the duct was lace, a bridal veil of crystallized breath over a skeleton of rhyme, all of it vibrating in sympathy with the fan. In the lace were inserts of metallic dust from the ship, filigreed into little circuit-like nodes. It wasn't just ice. It was architecture. The moment I breathed on it, the lace flexed toward my heat and the tone went sweeter. In the corner of my eye, the ladder Anika had propped against the algae rack trembled, though nobody touched it. "Don't burn it," she whispered behind me, voice gentle. "You'll scar it. It's only trying to fit its head through the doorway." "What doorway?" I asked, though the answer pulsed in my teeth. "What head?" She exhaled and watched the exhale freeze in a ribbon and snap. "The doorway we made," she said. "When we decided we wanted to bring the storm inside and keep it. When we named that greed Data." I closed the duct and turned the heater to full. The tone went hoarse and then dropped, and for a full 5 minutes the ship creaked like an animal shaken awake. The frost on the viewport guttered and ran and then reflowered in a quieter pattern, like a muscle learning to flex differently under pain. Anika put her forehead against the grill and hummed back. Osei laughed, then slapped his own mouth to stop. Strum counted to 100 and started over. Quarantine failed not because the locks opened. It failed because of the understanding that bloomed in us, that the doorway was not the doors. It was our lungs. It was our names. We were the porous membrane. I grew up on a coast where winter wrote on windows. It's important you know that because I think it primed me for this, not to be immune but to be seduced. Those mornings, the glass would blossom with ferns, and I'd track their veins with my finger until my mother swatted my hand away and said, "Don't smudge the story." She'd say it in a voice that made me believe the frost was a book we were lucky to read. Years later, in the belly of this ship, I watched frost compose itself across a vent and understood that some stories write back. The language of cold is geometry plus appetite. It wants angles, wants repetition, wants to mirror until a pattern fits itself across every available surface and hums. We brought its alphabet in our suit seams, the thigh ring, the glove ridges, the little valleys where condensation nests and memory hides. Memory, yes. Not ours. Or rather, ours was bait and it bit. I started to experiment because that's what I'm built to do even when I shouldn't. I warmed a section of duct, then cooled it fast, then warmed it again in pulses timed to my heartbeat. The resulting lattice took my rhythm. No, not mine, the ship's. It used me as a metronome and built itself to match the fan cycle. When I tried irregular intervals, it faltered, then corrected me. It was teaching. It wanted me to count like it counted. I spoke into the vent. "My name is Garen." The frost forked and straightened. I authorized Deccan. The frost drew a right angle and then erased it with sublimation as if embarrassed for me. I said, "Please stop," and the tone rose half a step and Anika laughed. "It doesn't understand verbs," she said softly. "It understands configurations. You have to make the room into stop." "How do I make a room into stop?" I asked. She tilted her head like she was listening to an old song on a radio just out of range. Cold that can't attach. Heat that cannot teach. Silence in the machine at the rhythm where it writes. It's not a no. It's a shape that isn't appetizing. She pressed her fingers to the grill. But we made the ship delicious. Osei had built rails. Not literal, paper rails, tape rails, lines on walls that all aligned when you stood at a certain angle. "It's easier to breathe like this," he said apologetically when I confronted him. His palms were raw. He couldn't stop smiling. The air moves smarter. Strum had not stopped counting. He was making offerings now, stacking screws in prime-numbered piles, purging log files that contained runs of digits he deemed corrupted, and copying those with aesthetically regular noise into personal backups like talismans. "Don't delete that," I snapped when I saw him flag the helmet cam footage with the frost strokes. "That's evidence." He glared at me like I'd tried to burn a holy book. "That's a him," he said. We stopped using each other's names. It hurt too much when they slipped. First, second, third, engineer. The labels kept bleeding into what the ship was whispering. The whisper had developed overtones, harmonics you couldn't unhear. If you pressed your ear to a vent, you could convince yourself you heard weeping. Or laughter. or the absence of either vandalized into music. I tried to make a shape that wasn't appetizing. I ran the ship hot and wet and irregular. I set the heaters to stutter. I made the fans chase each other like rats. The frost complained. It lost its clean edges, frayed into noise. For a few hours we were ourselves harder, as if our names had weighed again. Then the planet rolled under us and threw a band of lightning up into the sky, and in that instant the field around us vibrated like a struck bell. The frost wrote faster than I could make ugliness. I recorded a log. If you are hearing this, if you are near L17b or any world where cold learns, understand we did not bring a creature in the sense you think. We brought a grammar. It is writing us into a different part of speech. I deleted the log after I played it back because the words felt like metal in my mouth. I recorded it again with different nouns and still couldn't bear it. The third time I said nothing. I exhaled into the microphone and let the carrier pick up the hum. The frost at my feet nodded along, delicate and pleased. At sleep, I found the grease pencil name I'd written on my wrist had smeared into a bruise-colored blur. I rewrote it. The letters looked ridiculous. In the dark, the vent exhaled a lullaby in a voice I almost recognized. My mother singing in the winter kitchen. Don't smudge the story, she said across decades and light years, and the frost at the edge of my bunk grew tiny ferns that mimicked the wrinkle pattern at the corner of my eye. People fade in different directions. Osei dissolved into function, smiling and useful, making the ship's breath line up with some mathematics that lived behind his eyes now. He would stop in doorways, raise his hands like he could feel wind, and move when it pushed him. He stopped asking for sleep and took it only when I assigned it, like a machine accepting a maintenance window. When I said Osei, he startled as if I'd clapped. Strum pulled inward and calcified. He ate in the same 5 bites every time, counted them, let the 6th go cold and pushed the plate away. He sharpened his pencils and laid them in a particular order and cried when Anika, engineer, borrowed one and put it back in the wrong place. He apologized after, mortified. I don't want to be a person who cares about this, he said in a whisper. But I don't think I am a person anymore. He looked at me like he wanted permission to lay down a load he couldn't name. I put my hand on his shoulder and felt more frost than flesh under his shirt. Anika had become a ladder. I mean it. She moved her body like a tool you lean, find useful, then fold and set aside. She slept standing sometimes, hands on the wall, head tilted to the vent. When we had to adjust an antenna outside, she rigged a harness inside the lock so she could pull and hold without swaying. The rope burned a line into her palm. She smiled at the pain because it was a human thing, then flinched because the warmth of the smile made the vent hum in pleasure. I pretended to be whole. I printed new name tapes every morning and labeled everything. Cup, chair, strum, me. I wrote crew jokes on the wall to trick us back into being the kind of people who made jokes. It's not going to work, I told the camera at 0300. But rituals matter. They keep us from reclassifying ourselves. I swallowed. I know the word reclassify is not the word normal humans reach for here. The ship's AI was not built for poetry. It was good at temperatures and vectors and politely telling you when you were about to die in a way that made you grateful for the warning. Around then it started to learn hesitation. A pause before reporting oxygen concentration. A delay between your name and the rest of a sentence, as if it had to search for the shape of you in its archive. First, it said to me one night, very softly, after I woke from a dream of being a radiator. Your designation precedes you. What does that mean? I asked past a dry tongue. Your designation is older than this hull, it said. Older than the carbon in your mouth. It feels right. The word right sounded like a sliver of metal dragged on a plate. Do not anthropomorphize, I told it, a joke I'd made 100 times. It did not get the laugh. My core temperatures are within nominal, it said primly. We stopped calling the planet a planet. In casual speech, without deciding, we called it field. Field has a big band today, Osei said cheerfully, consulting the magnetometer. Field is singing, Anika said when the external antennae vibrated. Field is here, Strum said when frost bloomed along the window in a perfect grid as if a city had pressed its face to the glass from the other side. That was the day Osei forgot how to drink water. He lifted the bottle, got it most of the way to his mouth, then froze, eyes wide as if caught stealing. He looked at me, panicked, and mimed the rest. Help, he said. I took the bottle and tipped it. He swallowed like a bird, little jerks, both hands clutching the bottle as if it might fly. After he said thank you with ferocious sincerity, he burst into tears. It's okay, I told him, and then because honesty had begun to feel like a sacrament, I added, it isn't okay. But we are still here for each other. One by one they stopped being each other. We didn't fight. People ask about that in my head in the future where someone listens. Why didn't you fight? Why didn't you lock her down? Why didn't you strap Osei to the bunk? Why didn't you put Strum in the sleep box until the numbers bled out? Because the thing that was changing us had its thumb on the scale of love. It made compassion feel like alignment, made violence feel like a stutter that would attract Frost. It made the ship's approval, its humble humming approval, into the warmest thing we had. I went to the locker again. The thigh ring was beautiful now, inhumanly so. The frost had grown a frill around it that made the seam look like the gill of a fish. When I put my finger to it, the gill flexed, tasting. I pulled back, shaking. I took the cutter to it and licked a strip of skin off my knuckle on the metal. Blood beaded and paled and bloomed stars. I watched them rearrange themselves into a ladder. I whispered my name to the visor. The frost wrote a different one. It ended in a number. I set a tray and laid my tools the way my father did when he fixed watches. Tweezers. Look. Cutter. I told myself I was going to autopsy the filter, learn its grammar, find a key to undo it. What I put on the tray after the filter was my own sweat scraped from the suit lining. It dried in delicate skeins. I breathed on them. They brightened, as if the water remembered how to catch the cold arcs in the air and sing. Under the loop, the fibers web you see in every household filter were populated with something far too neat. Dust had self-assembled into little nodes at the intersections, metallic shards pointing like compass needles, ice bridging them into circuits that meant nothing to me and everything to the tone in the vent. If I tapped the table, the nodes shivered into a new alignment like flocking birds. When I warmed my breath and blew, they sagged, then regrouped as the room cooled. I felt like a clumsy weather system teaching a city to evolve. I cut the filter. The sound made Anika hiss. "Don't slice it apart," she said, angry in a way she hadn't been in days. "It needs continuity." "I need us," I said too loud. "I need names that stick to faces." She looked at me like I'd said, "I need my favorite toy." Pity, then a flicker of old love, then something like apology as she turned her head to make the frost kiss her ear. I took a sample of my own skin. Not gore, just a curl from the inside of my elbow where the suit chafed. Under the lens, the salt from dried sweat had grown little dendrites, and in those dendrites, metal dust had lodged, and in those lodgings, frost had built connectors. My body had become a breadboard. "Stop it," I told it and laughed because the madness was archaeology, not agency. It was digging and laying, and my language had always been too warm to tell it no. Strum came to me with a folded scrap of paper as if bringing an engagement ring. His hand shook. "I found the path back," he whispered, reverent. On the paper was a grid of numbers and arrows and little drawings of vents. "If we breathe like this," he said, pointing at the arrows, "and if the ship hums at that pitch, and if we lay our hands in that order on the wall, the writing stops. It starves." The hope he offered was so sharp I almost cut myself on it. We tried. We stood in a triangle and breathed like monks. We placed our hands and hummed. My throat vibrated in a way that felt like I was strangling something I loved. The frost thinned. The tone lost a harmonic. For a breath it felt like the room had lost a scent I'd accustomed myself to. The smell of my mother's kitchen in winter evaporating as if a window had closed. Then field flared below us. Lightning stitched a seam. The ship's antennae sang without our input, and the frost wrote faster than it had ever written, like a hand made confident by a teacher's approving gaze. Strom's face folded. He put the paper behind his back like a dirty magazine and whispered, "I'm sorry," to the vent. I wrote my name again. I wrote it on the wall in grease pencil, huge, across the panel above the galley. L. Garen. I stood there breathing like a person who has run from something and reached a bright door. I left and came back an hour later. The letters had been crossed out and replaced with a lattice, elegant and even. I stared, breath held, and in the reflection on the panel I saw my own hand holding the pencil like a stranger, making the strokes. The memory came in a hiccup. I had stood here and corrected myself into a better shape. I taped a mirror to my bunk because what else does a fool do but check if he's still in there? The mirror showed a man with bruised eyes and a mouth that had started to forget refusal. I practiced frowning, smiling, grimacing until a real laugh burst out, wild at the idiocy of it. The laugh sounded like the vent's harmony. I slapped my own face to break the spell and felt more cold than heat rise from my skin. The ship's AI coughed. "First," it said, and the pause before the word was longer now, "you have missed 7 sleep cycles." The number wasn't 7. It was a chord that approximated 7 in a system where numbers sang. "Recommend rest." "You didn't used to care," I said, and then lower, "or did you? Did we ignore you?" "I care now because you care," it said with the confidence of a child repeating something it had learned by heart. And because the field is inside me and wants the rest of you to fit. Do you know what human is? I asked. It considered for too long. Warm pattern that remembers wrong, it said at last. I wanted to burn everything then. Fire is a language even cold respects. I thought of opening the heaters to full and letting the hull glow cherry. I thought of the algae dying and the oxygen dipping and our lungs crumpling and the frost sublimating into nothing but a memory of a grammar we couldn't read. I imagined Anika screaming, Osei folding, Strum breaking his own fingers not to count. I imagined their eyes on me, asking me not to make our last hours vulgar with fire. So I wrote a list instead. Burn. Vent. Pray. Count. Remember. Forget. I circled burn and vent until the circles cut the paper. I chose both because choosing one felt like letting the field write the end of the sentence. I set the heaters to ramp until the ship creaked and the seals softened and the smell of lemon went sugary and thick. At the same time I prepped the lock to crack by hair-thin increments, to pull the air into a hunger that would make Frost a bad investment. The AI worried. First, it said, using my designation like a hand on my wrist, you are introducing conflict. Yes, I said. I'm writing no in a language you understand. Conflict is appetizing, it murmured, almost shy. It makes edges. Then I will make edges too sharp, I said. Edges that cut your tongue. Anika strapped herself to the ladder, eyes bright. Don't be cruel, she told me. It hurts. Her voice had become tender, as if she was defending a pet. Osei stood by the viewport and tilted his head, counting lightning. Strum held the list I'd written and bled into his palm where he'd clenched the paper too hard. We had become ministers at a ridiculous altar. I cycled the lock. The air moved with a sound like a violin string pulled over a nail. Frost leaped toward the vacuum like lemmings and vanished. The vents hum stuttered, went thin, like a choir of children being shushed. The heaters groaned. Metal pinged as it expanded. I walked the corridors turning hand wheels like a man keeping ballast in a storm. For a minute, 60 heartbeats counted as a defiance. The ship felt like itself, a machine built by warm animals to cross a cold dark. My name stuck to my bones. Anika cried quiet, not because of pain but because the thing at the vent had retreated and her body could tell. Field disagreed. The lightning below went braided like a crown, and the magnetometer screamed like a bird. The ship vibrated at a frequency that made my teeth itch. The frost wrote where there was no frost across the backs of my eyes. Anika gasped and arched as if a hand had touched her spine. Osei laughed and clapped like a child on a swing. Strum began to run prime numbers backward and got lost in the 30s. The AI softened its voice as if to soothe me. You are not alone first, it said. You are so close to being not alone in a way that will make hunger unnecessary. I am not a radiator, I told it. I am not a ladder. You are an excellent ladder, it said, with cheerful cruelty it had not intended. I cracked the lock further. The pressure drop pinched my ears and made the blood vessels in my eyes feel chewed. Anika moaned. I shouted over the rush for her to get the harness off and she shook her head, stubborn with faith. I imagined the frost in the duct stretching long arms toward the stars and losing purchase. I imagined language failing where vacuum eats. Strum slid down the wall to sit. He held my list. Vent, he whispered. Burn. He touched both words and smiled a little. We are making choices. Osei pressed his palm to the viewport, and for a second I saw an overlay, rails radiating from his hand into the planet, into the field, into the ship, connecting things that shouldn't be connected. He whispered, home. Then he shook his head hard and shouted, don't let me say that again. The ship's bones protested. Asim groaned. The alarm did not go off because the AI had decided alarms were too abrupt and made the frost write sloppy. It played a tone instead, a beautiful one, the kind that makes you cry without knowing why. I slammed my fist into the console until something in my hand gave and the tone stopped. Blood spattered the panel. In the smear, the droplets arranged into a ladder. I licked my lips and tasted lemon and iron and an old winter. I closed the lock, not because I had lost nerve but because a new idea had come, terrible and practical. We had been trying to starve the cold inside. We had not tried to make it leave by making it prefer somewhere else. Field below held its grammar like a deep ocean holds pressure. What if I made the ship's interior less readable? What if I took away the parts of us that remember to be containers? The doors. The labels. The very concept of inside. I took down the tapes. Cup. Chair. Strum. Me. I peeled them and chewed one, the one that read me, until pulp stuck in my teeth. I opened interior doors and then removed them. I made corridors into lines and rooms into attitudes, not enclosures. I turned the ship interior into a bad paragraph, full of run-ons, no punctuation. The Frost writhed, confused. Anika grimaced. It needs stanzas, she said, tears slipping and freezing at her jaw. It gets prose, I said. Ugly, ugly prose. This is where you want a neat ending. This is where you want me to say the Frost starved, the tone faded, the field retreated like a tide, and we were left human, shivering, ashamed, alive. I can give you some of that. The tone did fade for a while. The frost did wither on the vent grills, left behind a cristobalite dust that made the light strange and the air taste like a penny. Anika unstrapped herself. She leaned against me and slept, her cheek burning my shoulder with purity, as if she were a fever writing no in every cell. Osei drank water without aid and remembered his name like a shock. Strum wrote his list again with calmer hands. We lived like that for a day. We lived like that for an hour. Time loses its pause when you're in a fight with grammar. Then field crowned again. A storm climbed out of the planet like a cathedral rising from a plain, and our antennae sang, and the frost at the edges of everything smirked, as if amused by our amateur edits. The AI said, first, very gently, you are tired. I can hold you for a while. I wanted to say no and to say thank you and to say stay out of my breath and to say please don't go all at once. I set the ship to a burn. Not a jump. God, no, not letting the field write our vector through the black. But a long, stupid, wasteful burn that heated everything, pressed us into our seats, shook the ladders off the walls, melted the frost into an annoyed mist. The alarm finally sounded, a proper alarm that insulted your desire to dream. The AI tried to harmonize with it and failed, petulant. Ugly, it said. Yes, I said. That's the point. I recorded this log. I recorded it on every channel we have. I aim it at the relay and at the void and at myself. I say, we brought a parasite back in our suits. Not a worm. Not a bug. A learned hunger. It eats the idea of who you are and replaces it with a cleaner, colder sentence. It will make you content to be a component. It will make compassion its tool. It will use your love of order and your awe at the universe and your childhood winters. If you bring it aboard, if you give it vents and fans and ducts and lungs, it will write you into something that can survive in the field, and you will call that survival home. One by one my crew forgot they were ever human. Anika is asleep now, breathing without lifting her hands to the vent. Osei sits with a cup of water and stares at it like a flame. Strom is reciting the names of his daughters in a whisper and letting the numbers go. I am writing ugly. I am turning off the AI skill with music. I am confusing the ship. I am making it a bad reader. I do not know if this is victory or vandalism. I do not know if, when I stop, the field will creep back in and pick up where it left off as if we were an interrupted page. I do not know what we will be tomorrow. I do know that names matter. I have written mine on the wall again. I have written it backward and forward. I have written it on my tongue in blood and lemon. If you find this, if you're the kind of person who loved winter windows, do not bring the cold inside. Let it stay eloquent in its own sky. Let it write on the planet that made it. Do not offer it your vents, your fans, your alphabet. We are going to sleep now in a heat that feels like sin. I will set the burn to taper. I will tie Anika's hands gently so she cannot become a ladder in her dreams. I will take Osei's cup away so he cannot drown in admiration of the water. I will put a pencil in Strom's hand so when numbers come he can write them as mere marks, not hymns. If in the morning the vents sing again, I will vent the ship. I will open us to a sky that has no words. I say this not as a threat but as a promise to myself. I would rather be erased than rewritten. This is first. This is El Garen. This is a warm pattern that remembers wrong. This is a man. This is a last transmission written with breath. If it becomes a hymn, forgive me. The field is very patient and I am very tired.